Welcome back to Seek Strength and welcome back to the glorious land of Sikhistan. Today's video is brought to you by our off-season strength athlete. So this is our higher volume phase of training for athletes in their off-season to get them prepared at the start of their off-season. So high volume strength movements, a lot of kind of hypertrophy effect. There is no Olympic lifts in this program. And for those of you wondering, there will be off-season strength for athletes coming soon in the not so distant future, so stay tuned for that one.
Welcome back to Sikhistan. Welcome back to another episode of us answering questions that were asked in a video in the comment section. Today is a question from our GPP video we did last week. This question comes from Uchi Hamad and he says, would you recommend doing 2 GPP sessions a week year round just to stay in great shape? So the answer is no. We really wouldn't recommend that. We wouldn't do that with any of our athletes really. Athletes you'd see doing kind of GPP all year round would be kind of recreational CrossFitters or just people who are recreationally into staying fit. Most of their training will look like general physical preparedness, but in terms of for athletes, we really wouldn't be recommending to do that all year round. So the first reason we wouldn't recommend it is that high fatigue comes along with general physical preparedness work, right? So it's kind of a blunt tool. Most of the time it will be at quite high intensity levels. The volume will usually be quite high, although the intensity is low. When you're in a sport-specific stage or when you're in a kind of in-season block of training, you need to be developing motor patterns, you need to be learning new motor patterns, and this kind of stage of learning is not ideal to be fatigued during. So using GPP work during those sport-specific phases isn't really ideal for the high skill, high kind of mental capacity pieces that you need when you're playing your sport.
So the other reason you wouldn't need to do this and you wouldn't actually end up doing GPP all year round is because you simply don't need to do that. So if you imagine the reasons you're doing GPP work for, so general physical preparedness work, if you don't know what we're talking about, if you don't, go back and watch last week's video on this subject. So you don't need to do this all year round. If you imagine you've different attributes, you have your general physical preparedness, you have your power training, you have your strength training, you have all these different skills. And if you imagine these kind of like attributes in a video game, for example, and you fill each of these up with specific types of training. So when you do your GPP or general physical preparedness training, you fill up this kind of tube of attributes, you build these blocks up, and these blocks don't leave you immediately. These don't decay immediately. These don't drop off the week you stop doing GPP work. These don't leave you as soon as they're gone. These attributes slowly decay over time. And because of that reason, you can maintain the benefits and the attributes of that GPP work for quite a long period of time. And that's why athletes are able to get away for doing GPP once, twice a year, maybe at most. And then they maintain a lot of the benefits from that. So like the physiological adaptations we get from it, the psychological break we got from training, the adaptations you get to your tendons and tissues, your kind of mitochondrial density, aerobic capacity that you would have gotten from GPP training or some of the hypertrophy work you might have done depending on what sport you were doing. All of these things last quite a period of time and then they decay slowly over the course of that career. And as long as you're still training, you actually still get a lot of those benefits from that. So what you can do is to stop that decay from increasing drastically or kind of exponentially getting away from you and maintaining some of that capacity you gained from your GPP work is you can actually just do a reasonable amount of low intensity steady state cardio. So LIST cardio you might have heard it called. So if you're any number of athletes, so for kind of a strength based athletes, this would look like something, maybe 2, 3, 4 sessions a week of very low intensity walking, stationary bike, rowing. You can do this quite frequently without negatively impacting your training. And if you've built up your capacity for the GPP in your off season phase, once you introduce this low intensity steady state cardio, once you get training, you won't see a lot of negative effect from this cardio on your strength training. So the interference effect won't be massively influential because you'll already have built up your qualities and you'll already have adapted towards that. So the stimulus this places on your body won't be as demanding as if you freshly introduced this cardio without have ever done a GPP phase, and it'll be quite succinct with the rest of your training if you stay on top of it. Now for other athletes, this will look a little bit different, which Fitz is going to get into in a second. So if you're a non-strength sport athlete.
So why might other athletes or different sports not need to do the GPP work when you're actually playing your sport? Well, the main thing is that a lot of field sports, a lot of kind of athletics and stuff like that will have a huge amount of kind of general work in it, right? So if you're a soccer player, if you're a hockey player, a rugby player, you're playing your sport, you're getting a kind of broad sense of aerobic development, you're getting a lot of the stuff you would be doing in a GPP block, and you're probably getting much higher aerobic values than you would even in a GPP block or in an off-season block. So a lot of that sport-specific work you're doing, even though it's kind of very highly fatiguing, it might be quite high in terms of skill demand, it's also getting you there in terms of your aerobic values, your cardiovascular values, and so you probably don't need the GPP work. You do need the GPP work when you're in your off season, because you're probably just lifting weights or doing sprints or doing a lot of power development work, and you're not on the field or on the court or on the track. You're probably not running, sprinting, bounding, but when you're in season, you're doing a lot of that. The next reason, or the last reason, an athlete probably won't do GPP work all year round is simply down to time scheduling. So if you're involved in a team sport or even an individual sport where your really defined training times are kind of blocked out for you. So if you're a basketball player, you're going to be training on the basketball court 2 or 3 times a week, competing 2 or 3 times a month then on top of that. It's not really your choice where you get your training blocks to be done, and then your additional training, your auxiliary training, has to be slotted in around that. So if you're a rugby player and you're training on the field every Tuesday night and Thursday night, you might have a captain's run on Friday and then a game on a Saturday or Sunday. You probably have to fit 2 gym sessions in around that, so that blocks up pretty much every day of your week. You might then have at least 1 physio session for most of the season, just keeping you in shape and keeping you being able to play ball. Finding spaces to do that GPP work in the kind of interim there, in the mornings before work or college, or in the evenings after your training session is already done, will probably just be maladaptive for you. You'll probably just end up overreaching a bit too far, and you just use a bit too much energy that you really didn't need to use in the first place. If you have more questions about GPP or just more questions about strength and conditioning in general, pop them down in the comments below. If you didn't agree with anything we said here, you can just keep those thoughts to yourself.